Hello there, everyone. Russell Goodman, Supply Chain Brain Senior Editor here, welcoming you to our presentation today about the all-important topic of visibility. The title for today's program, Revolutionizing Value Chain Visibility and Collaboration through Connected Partner Ecosystem. But first, some housekeeping to attend to. A Q&A session will follow the presentation, and the way that you participate is by filling in the purple box at the bottom of your screen with your question. Our presenters will address as many as possible before we sign off today, but not to worry, any questions that we don't get to, any questions still pending, they will get to offline. You know, supply chains worldwide continue to grapple with economic uncertainties, geopolitical tensions, and unpredictable demand shifts. For organizations to succeed, each element in the value network, from suppliers and channel partners to warehouse or logistics providers, must work in harmony. And companies need to have visibility of what's happening across the supply chain, be able to collaborate, exchange data, orchestrate supply chain processes with partner ecosystem seamlessly and in near real time. A connected, cognitive, and responsive supply chain network allows enterprises to swiftly access alternative suppliers, distribution channels, or fulfillment partners, adapting to rapidly changing market dynamics. However, achieving this is challenging. Only 21% of organizations have complete supply chain visibility, and over 75% acknowledge their network collaboration as a work in progress. In this session, a leading analyst and two industry leaders will discuss more about this while sharing their insights on the importance of technology in enabling this transition. The agenda for today, well, we're going to be looking at the supply chain industry outlook for 2024. Very important information there. We're going to look at key challenges that organizations are facing in connecting and collaborating with partner ecosystem and gaining visibility. We're going to walk through strategies that are leveraged by leading manufacturing and consumer brands in addressing these challenges. And we're going to see just how a connected, collaborative, and responsive supply chain network helps you overcome supply chain shocks. Well, here's the lineup of experts that we're going to be hearing from today. Rahul Ugada, Vice President, Consumer Retail and Logistics at Infosys. Rahul is a digital leader with more than 28 years' experience in consumer packaged goods. At Infosys, currently, Rahul leads engagement with key CPG companies, supporting their data AI-driven digital transformation journeys across revenue growth management, route to market, omni-channel commerce, and supply chain. We're also going to hear today from Suresh Bharadwaj, Associate Vice President and Global Platform Head at TradeEdge at EdgeVerve. Now, Suresh has vast professional experience in product management, strategy, and business process consulting in the retail CPG industry. And we will hear from Eric Thompson, Research Director, Supply Chain Planning at IDC. As a research director there, Eric is a member of the IDC Worldwide Supply Chain Strategies Program, responsible for providing research, analysis, and guidance on key business and IT issues pertaining to manufacturing, CPG, retail, and healthcare supply chains. A truly spectacular lineup that's ready to walk you through this important program today. All right, and now to our presentation and to Eric Thompson of IDC. Eric, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Russell. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Excited to talk about this topic. In fact, it's something that I have worked on in the past as well, so I'm glad to be able to talk about this with you. Before I joined IDC, I had been at Nike for 21 years and worked kind of on the business side, really there, and really in all areas of supply chain. And what I've been sort of pleased to see in my time at IDC now, as I've gone broader across other industries, other businesses, talking to a lot of vendors, is a lot of the themes that we were dealing with there hold true across probably a lot of your supply chains that you are working in. And so I want to share just a few of those today, look at some trends, and then we'll go from those trends and we'll dive into some real meat on how people are addressing some of these things. But first, let's kind of start with that higher level piece, and we'll dive in quickly. I think it's probably no surprise to everyone here that you've been dealing with a few years of disruption and volatility. And so you can see the themes in this was a question in our supply chain survey of like over 1,500 supply chain managers, leaders, VPs, COOs of what is your response to managing risk? We've all been dealing with risk and near sort of black swan events, whether it be COVID or canals being shut down or just demand volatility. And you can see people are addressing this through visibility, agility, collaboration, multi-shoring, onshoring, nearshoring. What you should hear too is everybody wants to see what's going on. Everybody wants to react faster. But also, and I think this probably holds true for many of you, the response in terms of capabilities is actually increasing complexity in the supply chain at a time when, from a macroeconomic standpoint, there's a lot of costs and risks as well. And so that increase in complexity, in addition to sort of, we see in a lot of survey data that people are still dealing with latency and lag in their supply chains, is causing some issues that have not yet addressed the risk. And so that is kind of the reason that people are sort of focused on what we're calling at IDC supply chain orchestration, and that I think we're going to dive in a little bit more today. We do a yearly prediction. We call it our Futurescape. And one of our predictions this year was that by the year 2028, we'd see significant growth in supply chain orchestration. And almost I'd even say, don't worry about the numbers here. This is a prediction. It's just a crystal ball, right? But the topic is what's relevant today. And what I want to talk to you about a little bit is sort of what supply chain orchestration is and how people are dealing with that. I mentioned people are looking for more visibility. They're looking for agility. They're responding to disruption and complexity. And so there's this idea of I may not be able to predict something like, the Suez Canal getting blocked again. But if I can respond, say, faster than my competitors, or if I can respond with more intelligence, then perhaps I can have competitive edge. And I think that's one of the keys too, is everyone's looking for competitive advantage and how to separate and differentiate from competitors. And so the trend there has been that supply chains have been on this maturity path journey towards supply chain orchestration. And perhaps you've even seen this in some of your organizations where maybe you've had point control towers. Maybe you've had siloed solutions. Maybe you've addressed this in the execution space, even just asking questions like, if my product is on containers on vessels and there's a port strike, which vessels are they on? What products do I have? Which orders are at risk? Even just answering little questions like that. And I say little, that's not a little question. That's sort of been the historical response, is looking through the lens of execution and having visibility into that. But the journey is towards having a holistic view across every part of my enterprise, whether that is internal, sort of horizontally across all my functions, or even now sort of the next step that a lot of us are taking is to integrate vertically with my partners and to see beyond sort of my four walls, so to speak. There's challenges there. Whether in the past there's perhaps been technology challenges, but what's interesting is as the technology is catching up, to be able to truly integrate end to end and vertically and be able to give me more responsiveness. One of the metaphors I use sometimes, I used to be a runner, is there's this idea of proprioception. If you're walking or running and you step on a bump, your body is designed to actually know the whole system all at once. You actually instantaneously say, roll your ankle or something like that so that you don't get injured. Well, our supply chains just aren't there yet in terms of knowing everything in the system all at once, having the intelligence to make a shared and integrated decision, and doing things like scenario modeling. How are you going to make trade-offs between sustainability and cost and execution and these kinds of things? And at some point, are these not even trade-offs and we're making an optimized decision across the whole? So, I mentioned there's been technology challenges, but as technology catches up, is our talent prepared? Are our processes well enough defined? if we need to sort of automate or scenario model out things, can we even sort of teach the algorithms and teach the statistical models the decisions we want to make? So these are the kinds of things we're going to talk today about. We'll dive in a little bit deeper, but just kind of want to set the stage that we're sort of talking about a history of complexity, of lag, of disintegration, and moving towards this place where we're making sort of end-to-end holistic systems thinking decisions. And with that, Russell, I think you were maybe going to set us up a little.
Thank you, Eric. Excellent presentation. Thank you very much. And yes, now for an industry perspective right now on key supply chain trends and priorities as supply chain leaders see them in 2024. So I'm going to turn to Rahul and Suresh and say this. Eric, has just spoken to us on the connected supply chain and ecosystem. And I want each of you to elaborate, if you will, on some of the primary obstacles that organizations encounter when attempting to establish seamless connectivity and collaboration across their value chain partners. So, Rahul, if we could start with you first, how would you address that? What would you say?
Sure, thanks. And you kind of introduced me at the beginning, and I've been working with Infosys for the last 5 years, working with our CPG retail clients on their transformation in supply chain and route to market. But I also did, on the other side of the aisle, nearly 25 years at Unilever on different transformation initiatives. So really learning with all other clients of mine now. So I think the unlock of value with your partners is really immediate value to be unlocked for most of the organizations. So rather than doing the stuff in terms of the theory, let me talk about some practical examples of how this can be made possible. So one of our clients, which is sports apparel retailer, right, a very famous brand, decided to not go in for the online marketplace, which is a leading marketplace, right, and therefore wanted to run their own online journey. It was a bold decision, but then it couldn't have done it on their own because their inventory position, stock positions are very limited, right? So they had to rely on their retail partners. So they came to us, we worked with them. And the question was that in real time, can we have the visibility of the retail inventory so that when the consumer comes to their online shop, even if the stock is not available, they are able to allocate stock from the nearby store, and then the consumer can walk into the shop, buy something, and it is win-win for the retailer because then they will buy other merchandise. So that was a great ecosystem, and the real collaboration was required in terms of inventory and also the loyalty programs, because then you want the consumer not to lose the loyalty of both partners, and it becomes win-win-win, all three wins. So this is an example of how the unlock can happen, and it has really helped them to grow exponentially without the constraints of the inventory and without adding the new fixed cost on warehouses and other things. They are able to leverage the value of the ecosystem to achieve that. So this was one example. I just wanted to bring that to life, that the companies need to think creatively on how they collaborate with their partners.
Well, it's a great example, no doubt about it. Win-win-win, as you say. Suresh, in your view, primary obstacles that organizations are running into that they're facing, what would you say?
Absolutely. I think the challenge that you're going to find is you're now dealing with parties that are outside your enterprise, and therefore, their ability to collaborate with you, their maturity, both from a technology perspective and process perspective, that's going to be all over the place. You're going to find, your partners who are very mature, who can, do things on a dime at your asking, but then there are others who, either don't want to do it or can't do it. So there are two parts to it. One is the willingness, what's in it. You need to say, what can you do to motivate them to collaborate? So that's, one part of it. There's got to be some, business incentives. You got to answer the question, what's in it for me? Why should I do this? Mm-hmm. And the second part is, once you get over that hump, how do I do it? And more often than not, they're not too willing to spend a lot of money and invest time in meeting you where you are, it's got to be the other way around. If you're the one who is seeking collaboration, then you should have the wherewithal to say, look, I'll try to make this a minimal change for you, and I'm going to meet you where you are, and therefore we can drive this collaboration. Anytime there have been mandates to drive this collaboration, we have seen that over time it fizzles out. Barring maybe the top few partners, you can't really scale it up beyond them. And so it's very important for you to have a flexible mechanism, I would say, an architecture, both from a business point of view as well as technology, to help drive that collaboration. And I think that's where where we've seen most of the challenges, Russell.
That's an excellent springboard then for another area that I think we really need to explore. We're talking about challenges. Let's talk about strategies now, strategies that have proven effective for organizations, and particularly when we're talking about the manufacturing, logistics, and consumer goods spaces. Let's talk about these challenges, these strategies for overcoming challenges associated with connecting and collaborating with the partner ecosystem. So, Eric, if we could, let's start with you. What's your view on that?
Yeah, it's just interesting, the story, the use case, I'll call it, that Rahul was bringing up. I mentioned I worked at Nike 21 years. These were topics that we were talking about at my time there for sure. And it's kind of like, so if you're going to have volatile demand, and certainly a brand-oriented value chain is experiencing consumer shifts, unpredictability, and if you're in fashion or CPG, things can change. And so one of the key profitability drivers is making your inventory productive. And so whether it was a hot product or if it's not so hot, you've still got to find a way to make it move. And so I think both of the guys have touched on, we were having discussions at my time there, and even some resistance, let's say, because each of your partners has their own value chain in that case. And so this idea of exposing my data, maybe exposing my processes, it's not only the technology side. So there is this piece of, do I even have the tech to expose all of this and collaborate in real time? But there's also, what do I want to show to my partners? Do I trust? There's a certain level of trust that's in the discussion. Do I trust them on how they're going to handle this information? But to Rahul's point, if you can overcome some of those things and collaborate on how are we partnering together to get that sort of shared win. And I think for me, just if I was to boil that down, the focus becomes just actually kind of on the business metrics. All right, so if we're driving inventory productivity, how are we going to do that together? And we both share the desire to achieve inventory productivity as an example. So I think this idea of let's focus on a shared win, it sounds like there's been some progress since the time even that I was involved in some of these types of discussions.
Let's hope. Yeah. Well, Suresh, let's segue right on from challenges into strategies. What would you say?
So, I think, like I said earlier, the key is to identify value. And, I said, what's in it for me? So that's a question that you need to answer. Mm-hmm. And it's not the same, horses for, it's got to be different horses with different courses, if you will. So if you're in a planning cycle and you want to get better visibility so that you can do better demand forecasting, then you use a certain set of strategies in terms of, how latent can that data be? Mm-hmm. If you're running totally blind, then maybe even getting visibility to, hey, what happened this month or last month is probably good enough. But I think we are way past that, situation right now. More and more companies have realized that, using last year's historical shipment data is no longer good enough. And in fact, even using last month's data may not be good enough. Mm-hmm. So it's getting more and more, real time. The time is getting crunched. So if I can do better than that, then I would like to go maybe for a weekly sales, visibility, and then maybe even daily. So, so that's one part. If I'm looking for, better forecasting, in my demand planning cycle, right? Versus if you're looking at the execution, now you already have an order from my customer, and how do I, deliver to that order? How do I fulfill that order, meet the customer expectation on delivery times, etc. So then now you're in more real-time situation. How do I get real-time visibility to inventory? If I don't have it, who else can fulfill this order? And now the technology enablement will have to be truly real-time, truly API-driven, and that requires, I would say a lot less latency and visibility to inventory, because once you commit, you have to deliver, and so it becomes even more important. So I would say, purely from a technology strategy perspective, there are two different things when if you're in the planning cycle versus execution.
Suresh, if I understand correctly, I think there's something about a GXO that might be relevant to our conversation here. Am I right about that?
Yeah, and it goes back to typically, what we have done or what companies have done is try to do better forecasting, and it is not just about how much I'm going to sell, this year, but it's also about where am I going to sell it, right? Mm-hmm. Which means you'll need to position your inventory, appropriately. Otherwise, you're always going to have concurrent situations of excessive inventory in some locations and out of stock in other locations. Now, when it comes to execution, like in a 3PL context, like the one that you mentioned, the orders are already there. Consumers have placed an order, and the company, the brand, is relying on the 3PL partners to fulfill those orders for them, right? And how do they communicate those orders to the 3PL partners? And therefore, it's a matter of, look, if a demand is coming from a location that I didn't anticipate, now how do I actually take the order to where the inventory is, versus trying to say, look, I'm going to predict where the demand is going to come from, and therefore I'm going to position the inventory where I think the demand is going to come from. But the only thing that we all know about forecasting is that it's not going to be right all the time. Yeah. And therefore, how do I change the situation and say I take the order to where the inventory is? And we call it order orchestration, right? And so it could be, my locations, my warehouse locations, or my partner locations. So you need to be able to react in real time, take that order, and route it to the appropriate fulfillment location, and make sure that you can get that commitment. It goes a step further as well. It's not just between you and the inventory location, but also there is a carrier in between, because now it's not about just committing, this order is going to be delivered, but when is it going to be delivered? And so you will probably need to connect with a carrier in between, the logistics partner, get an ETA from them, and then really communicate that back to the consumer. And all of this needs to happen, I would say, in a sub-second response. So that's the real challenge.
Mm-hmm. True.
Yeah, I was just gonna, and forgive me for jumping in, but Suresh, you were making me think about that too. And I'm glad you said that sub-second response piece, because I think perhaps what you just described in the past, we would have had as a sequence of sort of decisions and processes. And I think we're at a place, and that's what I mean by that proprioception or that orchestration, where we need to know all of it all at once and get a decision out quickly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Raul, I wonder if you have a view on what we've been talking about here.
You're on mute.
So just to build on the point which Suresh made, there's another dimension for GXO in terms of, just imagine their N by N problem, right? They have to deal with N CPG companies, and they have to deal with N of their warehouses from where to pick. And these can be different ERP platforms on both sides, right? And WMS platform on the other side. So how do you orchestrate that order from one place to another? The one of the big challenges for them was onboarding time, as well as what Suresh was explaining in terms of execution in few seconds, but also how do you onboard, which might take months from different platforms and packages. And this intermediate capability which we put has actually accelerated that. Just coming to your question on the strategy, I would look at it in terms of 3 parts. First is the value. Look at where the value can be unlocked in terms of inventory, in terms of service levels, in terms of productivity of your employees, in terms of responsiveness, because all places there is always a demand for getting better value from the business. And that's the first step in my mind. Then it a data readiness scan, because you may want to do some things in a utopian world, it is possible, but unless that data infrastructure is put in place, it is not possible. So I think that's the second one, which is very, very important. And third is really leapfrogging with AI and Gen AI, because now if you have sorted out the first two, which is the value and the data, the possibility with AI and Gen AI is quite tremendous. Of course, it will go through few experimentation, failing, learning, and then scaling. That will always happen. But I think these three would be my strategy in terms of value, data, and AI and Gen AI.
Great practical information there, no doubt about that. Suresh, I want to return to you for just a moment. I think we need to drill down into the actual technology that's involved. And I guess primary question to you would be, let's talk about technology and digitalization and the role that they play in facilitating, let's just say, a better visibility and collaboration throughout the entire network, the entire supply chain network. So walk us through that. What would you say?
Yeah, I think the best way, to talk about this is, where companies have tried to do this on their own and, one-on-one with their partners. And, we've seen that, obviously the value is going to be in their biggest partners. And therefore, when you start with them, they end up spending sometimes months, and then I know in an example, like, one of our customers took 6 months to onboard their first partner. And by the time they were done, something changed at the partner's end. And they were kind of, they went back to square one. They had to start some things all over again. Or things would break because things do change in your ecosystem. The systems on your partner side that changes, or a process changes, or something about the data formats change. So there are a lot of things that could break. And therefore, trying to do this, one channel partner at a time, and trying to do this with your own internal resources is always going to, be very difficult to scale. And that's where, what we have, proposing is really to use industry platforms, like TradeEdge, where we've been able to connect and onboard multiple retailers and distributors on the platform. And once they're on the platform, you as a consumer of that data could get immediate access to the data, with, of course, some kind of a data sharing agreement with such partner. But the technology enablement is going to be almost, instantaneous, right? So what does that do? It will help you get to that value realization much faster. You'll be able to get the demand sensing, in near real time, if not real time. And again, it depends on how enabled your partners are. The kind of benefits that you get with such near real time visibility is definitely better forecasting accuracy, and therefore reduced out of stocks. We have seen some of our customers realize almost up to 20% increase in forecast accuracy. Now, when it comes to execution, like I said, the ability to go beyond your own inventory. Today a lot of the e-retailers, they can't even take an order if they don't have the product in stock. Now, it doesn't mean that someone else doesn't have that product actually available in more than what they can sell. So there's excessive stock somewhere else. So by really looking at this more as a network and not as a value chain, value chain kind of implies your visibility is limited to one up and one down in your value chain. Whereas when you look at this as a network, it's much more of a bird's eye view as to who else has got, products that you're looking for. And therefore your ability to scout and scan for how I'm going to fulfill this order becomes, tremendously increased. Obviously, knowing the demand, or the selling rates, the velocity of sales, and knowing inventory, you can drive suggested ordering and auto replenishment. And a lot of the building blocks for driving an autonomous supply chain actually lies in this visibility. And then, of course, in terms of working with your partners, say, let's say in the emerging markets or developing markets where a lot of your partners may still be running manual, processes. How do I digitize their operations? So there are tools and applications, that are available on the platform, some which are from traders, some which could be third-party applications that plug in. But the most important thing in all of this is to really go beyond integration. I would say, you need to be able to drive interoperability because integration simply brings you data, but for you to still make sense out of all of the data from your partners, you need to understand that in your context. A very simple example I can give there is, I have as a brand, I have a product master, and I have identified my products in a certain way. But when my partners report sales, they probably have changed their product code to something else in their systems. So when they're reporting sales using their product identification markers. Now, it doesn't make any sense to me in my context. So I still have to harmonize the data. And that's what I call, driving interoperability. So, and then of course, there are more challenges around the attributes of certain entities like sales or inventory and all of that. So how do I, harmonize all of that? It's all done through a platform where you would have defined canonical data models to drive that interoperability. So I think this is really, going beyond integration and making sure that there is seamless responsiveness from you as a company to what you see happening around you in your ecosystem.
Suresh, let me put on my potential customer hat, and let me just speak for many of the people who are watching the video today. I think you have walked us through and given us quite a very specific and detailed explanation of the technologies and platforms that we need that are particularly promising in this regard. Thank you for that. I wonder if either Eric or Rahul have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think that is really nicely explained by Suresh, the entire network ecosystem approach. Again, I think just building on some examples, Suresh talked about how some of the CPG manufacturers got better forecasting accuracy. Just want to build on that topic because that's very important for CPG companies today. Because traditionally, the CPG companies have been really relying on their shipment information to forecast what's coming up, right? But there is almost a 4 to 6 weeks lag between that shipment information and what consumer is off-taking. And in today's world, if you have that kind of a lag in your supply chain in responsiveness, it can be quite costly in terms of either the stockouts or excessive inventory, which can be, again, quite a challenge because then you'll have to discount it. And to address that, we partnered with some of the leading CPG companies to really work with them with their agreements on the retail data. But we created the bridge directly with the retail companies to ingest data, harmonize data, and now with GenAI, it is getting harmonized even faster without training. And then connect it with your ecosystem so that then you are able to use consumer offtake to really drive your supply chain, trade promotion planning, your media planning. All of that is with the real consumer demand rather than on the lag which you are doing on the shipment. So that's one example of how this comes to life.
I think my response to that, and I think Suresh kind of touched on this, is this notion of value throughout the network. And just to use a real, specific use case, at my last role before I had left Nike, you mentioned emerging markets. That's perfect because I was leading teams that were planning across 9 categories in 15 countries. And so you can imagine the data discrepancies and disparities, and even just getting things like point of sale data. We had some countries where we had only 20-30% of coverage across our retailers, of being able to even have visibility to that point of sale data. And I was working with some folks from Google, some PhDs in statistics from Stanford to try to build, and then I was sort of on the business side to try to build more predictive models as these guys are talking about. And we were having discussions with the retail partners to even show them the ways that we were looking at the information. And in one case, even to tell someone, if you can believe it, hey, you're buying too much of our product, to even tell a retailer to buy less because you'll be more profitable, we'll have better inventory, we'll drive better throughput, and all of us will win. And so that was kind of a case in point of saying, one, we need to drive you to even improve your data quality. Because we had our own standards, and I'm sure some of your industries and your companies do as well, where we would not even allow ourselves to sort of bring internally certain data if it didn't meet certain standards. And so we were even challenging our downstream partners to up their game in terms of their data quality. So there's a major data discussion, I think, that these guys are touching on, but there's also this piece of leading partners in some cases to say, I want you to focus on sort of profitability, and I want us to do this together. And certainly I like this idea as well of this shared inventory notion. If you don't have it, point people to your partners, because again, if inventory is becoming more productive, we're all going to be more profitable. So there's really just a mindset shift that says, hey, I'm not stopping in terms of just improving my internal processes and my internal systems and my internal data. I actually need to start calling my partners to something a little better as well.
A great real world story right there. Good information. Eric, I want to stick with you because, I think what you were just talking about leads into an area that I think is important to explore. It's one thing to talk about collaboration. It's quite another to actually do it. It's quite another to foster a culture, if you will, of collaboration at not only at your own enterprise, but certainly among your partners in the value chain. So I guess the question to you would be steps that organizations need to take if they're going to establish and nurture that type of culture. So walk us through that. What would you say?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a couple off the top of my head, and maybe if I give a little bit of a classic like people, process, systems type of answer. The first thing is I think we're seeing at IDC in some of our survey data. I'd almost say even I'm a little bit surprised, though I probably shouldn't be, at the level of, let's say, legacy tools and systems people are still using in collaborating. When we look at some of our data in the ecosystems and network space, there's still phone calls, emails, spreadsheets, and these types of back and forth. Well, there's going to be a lot of latency and lag in that, right? And that's just real world. We're living in it. It's not like there's problems with spreadsheets. I consider myself pretty talented in Excel, and I'm glad for that. But there are starting to be a lot more sophisticated tools and processes for that. So that's the first, is like, do I even have the tools? And even then connected to that, is my talent ready to even leverage those tools? It's one thing to say, hey, here's these great collaboration tools and all the visibility you need. But now you've got to have people who think across silos, both, like I said, vertically and horizontally. And one thing we've even looked at in the past too is even, I think Suresh and Rahul were kind of touching on this, is, are we even talking about data in the same way? It's like with language. You may say one word and I say the same word, and we actually mean two different things. And we're seeing that in data as well, that even internally across functions, and we used to have these arguments at Nike all the time. If I say sales, am I talking units? Am I talking dollars? In what kind of time bound am I talking about? And so there's even just some really simple steps that people need to take to start sort of codifying and standardizing the ways that we look at and talk about our data, so that we can have a shared view and actually do that collaboration.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Question that I'm sure is going to be top of mind.
Mind if I
Go ahead, Rahul.
One thing, I think just want to build, I think, wonderful points, Eric, on data, process, how they work together. And you also did mention people, but I want to just amplify on that people aspect, because see, when collaboration happens, it is amongst people. It is not organization. It is only people from those organizations, right? So trust is a very important element in that collaboration. And what happens is that unless one of the points Suresh made, that what is in it for me is not clear, then for the sake of collaboration, nobody wants to collaborate. And if it is only for your win, they are not ready to collaborate. So where is that win-win? Unless that happens, that doesn't. So I'll give you an example of many years back, and this is all in public domain, for Unilever in Asian markets, is largely distributor-led, right? And there was almost two universe. You had the principal selling to distributor and distributor selling it to the outlets. But then with limited collaboration and ordering by the distributor was quite random, and it used to have either overstocking or stockouts. But more importantly, the distributor was carrying a lot of stock, and their return on investment is purely dependent on how much they have put it in the stock, right? So when Unilever brought together with the distributor, the main value for them is that we will help you cut down your stock and therefore improve your churns and therefore better returns, right? And that became a win-win situation for us because they got better on-shelf availability, even Unilever stock reduced, but more importantly, distributors are getting better returns with reduced stock. So I think that's example I wanted to put to table on how collaboration and trust is very important.
Very, very good. Suresh, do you have a view that you want to express on that?
Really, the other thing that I wanted to add here was we talked so much about latency, but I think it's also important for even within the enterprise for all the functions, whether it's sales, marketing, supply chain, even finance, to read off of the same version of truth, right? And, each function has their own sources of data, and therefore, when sales is making their planning, they're using a different data set compared to what marketing might be doing. So supply chain might be having their own data sources. And so it's important, for one to really bring it all together into a centralized data service or data as a service, even within the enterprise. So a lot of the reconciliations that happen through S&OP processes today could actually be, avoided if we can all agree, hey, this is the same thing that we are all looking at, right?
Yeah.
And so that is another thing that I wanted to add. It's as much about latency as it is about we're all looking at the same data and understanding it the same way.
Great, valuable distinction there. Thank you so much for that, Suresh. Gentlemen, great stuff so far, but the presentation and the panel discussion now has brought a flood of questions in from the attendees in today's program. So we want to get to some of those. Let me just say this, folks, again, for the audience, any questions that we don't have time for during the program, our experts will address them offline. So keep sending them in. Okay, question one. And this is something I know is top of mind for a lot of people. Generative AI. What is the estimated percentage of Gen AI adoption that you foresee in the supply chain industry? Great question. Who wants to take that first? Let me just go down the line. Eric, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I may dodge the question specifically on percent, and certainly it's a hot topic, right? And before I even get to that question, I want to kind of come back because it's connected to something I think we were just discussing. When we talk about collaboration, I'm starting to think through the lens of decision support as well. And what I mean by that is, let's say that there's an exception in my supply chain, and 99 times out of 100, I'm making the same decision. And I think there's an opportunity, whether through what I'll kind of, we need some language around this, but if I call it sort of classic AI, machine learning, statistical models, there are ways if I can define my decisions in my supply chain and define my processes and do that shared across functions, or if it's across partnerships, if we can agree on the decisions we're making with certain exceptions, we can start to automate a lot. So I think that's what bleeds into this discussion. And it's like, I think someone was asking, you said, kind of about real-time decision-making as well, and where are sort of the use cases. If you talk to sort of, let's say, an ice manufacturer, it's barbecue season in the summer and everybody's buying ice, being able to spot weather patterns and better predict how much ice is going to be needed, these types of things, or to sort of use historically unstructured data and feed that into my forecasting processes. But again, there's where I'm saying, we know as humans how we're going to respond. Okay, there's a heat wave next week, and so therefore I know there's some kind of historic uptick in my demand for ice. I can have, there's almost latency in the process too. It's not just in the tools and the data. If I have to have discussions about that and emails about that and meetings about that, now that's taken me time to decide what I want to do. But if I've been able to sort of have some process discipline, which comes back to Rahul's point about the people side, I've got to have had those conversations. What am I even doing with this information? What are the decisions I'm making? Now I can really leverage the power of all that visibility and all those tools. So it's a bit of a dodge, but I guess I'm just saying there's sort of a chicken before, or what is it? The cart before the horse, or the chicken before the egg kind of discussion. on preparing even to use this information so that you can leverage it.
Well, let's go in alphabetical order. Raul,
Yeah,
you're up.
Quick builds. I think, again, very dangerous to make any predictions in the AI and Gen AI world, because the progress is exponential in these months, and we are seeing that, right? So anything is possible, I would say. But I will talk about what is happening today and near future, what we are looking at, right? So that's how we're looking at Gen AI, because you can't look too much forward because there are too many possibilities. So the immediate one, which I'm sure is becoming mainstream, a lot of you is asking questions on unstructured and structured data, and the generative AI is able to answer your queries in real time across the databases and structures. That's becoming, slowly scaling up that and moving forward. That for at least document reading, that has become mainstream in many organizations. The second one is that, I think, Eric, you spoke about data, and data can be different for two people, right? Therefore, whenever you collaborate, you need to translate, you have to transform, you have to classify the data in different ways, which two organizations can understand. And that's where the generative AI is extremely smart. We had done this in past with machine learning, but you needed tons of data to really train the model and achieve it. So a lot of expensive data science. Now, generative AI is able to do at 85-90% accuracy right out of the box, and then you build a narrow transformer to train it further, it becomes even better. So that's also slowly gaining traction, and we're building into many of our products now, already getting mainstream. The last one is tricky, but I think we are working on it, and I think some people would have cracked it as well, is all this manual documents. Transporters are all documents are handwritten by the drivers, right? The proof of delivery is such an important document, but today it takes many days to understand, misinterpret, and it takes long time to digitize it. Generative AI can even read the handwritten documents now with certain level of accuracy, so you have to tune it and get it. And if we are able to crack that, then the value is quite a lot, particularly in the transportation and on-time fulfillment area. So I'm just giving few examples where it is becoming mainstream in supply chain.
I think Raul makes a good point when he says that it's difficult to talk about percentages. Maybe the question ought to be sort of rephrased and talk about the role of generative AI in visibility and in collaboration or whatever. But I want to get Suresh's perspective on this. What would you say, sir?
Yeah, there are traditional, problems to solve, in terms of, like Eric was saying, how do I manage the exceptions? And, on-time in full prediction is something that, companies try to do all the time. And if I can know that at the time of taking an order, as to whether this order can be fulfilled on time in full, that would be a great thing. And because I have dependencies on my suppliers and sometimes my suppliers. And so a lot of things could go wrong, when I'm, 2 or 3 tier deep in terms of my suppliers, right? So knowing, what the weak link is going to be, and being able to predict it, that this order is, has a certain chance of, meeting the customer expectations or not, I think is a good, use case to look at. And we have, done that more mathematically so far. Maybe with AI and Gen AI, we can try and look at that same problem differently. But interestingly, recently I came across a problem that I had, I was hearing for the first time, where, while most of us try to predict, how my sales are going to be, next week, next month, and so on. Here was a situation where apparently, someone in the social media went and said, chlorophyll, for example, is good for your acne. And so this is a company which is making vitamins. And so, they had a product which had chlorophyll, and the sales just shot up. It went through the roof, and they didn't know what caused it. And then they finally found out someone had mentioned this. And so they went ahead and started, ramping up their supplies. And, and they had enough stock, and then suddenly these sales went down, because someone else probably said, it had nothing to do with acne. And so the question was, it's not, and now they were stuck with a lot of inventory. They didn't know what to do with it. So they said, look, while most of us are trying to solve the problem for how much I'm going to sell, can someone tell me when my sales is going to drop? I don't know. It's a this is more a rhetorical question here. I don't have the answer, but I guess the answer probably lies in unstructured data, in all of the, social media, platforms that you have. And so maybe Jenna is, something that we can look at, scanning all of those and see. Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting, Suresh. It's just such a great use case that you've just shared, because that probably illustrates part of the point too, and why we need these types of solutions. Is there's going to be things that we can't predict. There's just going to, we will never, you mentioned if you have a forecast, it's wrong. I used to say that at Nike as well. And so there's a certain humility if you've come out of any kind of planning function. You can be really good at your job and you're still going to get some things wrong. But can I know what the shift is faster? And can I have already had sort of those people, processes, tools to respond to the shift? So in your case, would have been great if that company could have picked up, hey, there's a shift already that people are saying, no, never mind, I don't want that after all. And you would have had to have had sort of the data mining and even the exposing and sort of that translation, I think that you talked about earlier too. How do I translate, I don't know, social sentiment shifts into a demand forecast? And certainly that is untapped territory in many ways. This is new, but the vision is certainly there to do that.
Gentlemen, the questions keep pouring in, and the interest in artificial intelligence and its role, it clearly is something of import to many, many people. We are not going to be able to get to all of those questions during the program, but again, I remind everybody watching today that the experts will address your questions offline. Right now, though, I want to sort of sum up, if we might, because, gentlemen, we're coming up on time. So I'd like for each of you to take a moment to summarize the key takeaways from this session, in your estimation. Let me put it this way. What do you recommend to our audience to do in the next 60 days or so to bring more efficiency and seamless connectivity with their channel partners into their supply chain ecosystem? So, Eric, let me start with you. Let's see. What's your view on that? What should people be doing?
Sure. So I mentioned I kind of come from the business side, so my answer is going to lean a little to that side. And what I would say is, in my time at IDC, I've seen some great work on technology and enabling some of the vision that people have had for a long time. But that means preparing internally. Are we even ready to leverage that? So I would be looking at just even assessing across horizontally in my functions, how well am I prepared to collaborate and ingest this data? And then vertically with my partners, what are the things I'm going to need to be doing? What are the roadblocks to me even leveraging information and orchestration tools?
Good stuff. Good stuff. Suresh, your view, sir.
Yeah, I might have mentioned this before. When you try to drive such a collaboration, trying to do this on your own with your internal resources, is going to be very inefficient. Let me put it that way. So there are platforms available that you can leverage, and therefore you don't have to reinvent that wheel. So that would be my key, message here.
Rahul, what do you say, sir?
Again, I'll expand on the topic I talked about at the beginning in terms of value of the overall network and ecosystem. I would suggest to do a full opportunity audit across your value network, be it on demand side, supply side, and logistics side, and look at all the values to be unlocked, be it inventory reduction, be it service improvement, be it productivity improvement. And in a utopian scenario where you are able to connect seamlessly with your network partner, what is that value unlock? And I think if you have that imagination, then the data technology has unlimited value to unlock. Sorry.
Real world information there, real world expertise. Good stuff, gentlemen. Thank you so very much. I'm going to ask the folks, the attendees today, to look at your screen, because important information is right there for you. We have the QR codes that are up at the moment. You can download Connected Marketplace Point of View and, of course, the GXO case study that Suresh was talking about earlier today. So take a look at that. We also want you to be able to contact our speakers today, Eric, Suresh, and Rahul. And I believe their email IDs should be up. If not, you will be contacted, later by someone representing the program, and you can have a continuing dialogue with them. All right, gentlemen, outstanding program, but we're going to have to leave it there. That's simply all the time that we have for today. Again, folks, if we didn't get to your questions, the panelists will answer them offline. All right, I want to thank Eric Thompson of IDC, Rahul Ugata of Infosys, and Suresh Bharadwaj of EdgeVerve for sharing their time and their expertise with us. And a big thanks to you for attending today. This concludes our presentation. Until next time, Russell Goodman, Supply Chain Brains, saying so long.